They weren't lost. They were taken, eaten whole, stories and all. And we've built cities on the bones of their silence. You've heard of families vanishing in the woods. You've heard of missing persons. But no one ever told you about the feasts, not just meals, ceremonies. Across the hills of Appalachia, in the swamps of Louisiana, beneath the red clay of Georgia, there are places where maps refuse to speak. And when you dig too deep, you find blood-stained journals, half-erased census records, burnt-down homesteads, and an entire lineage wiped from history like they never existed. Cannibalism isn't just a last resort. That's the myth they fed you. In America, for some families, it was a birthright, a right passed through generations, not born from starvation, born from ritual, from power, from control over life, over memory, over the line between man and beast. In 1871, a preacher's wagon arrived in Red Rock, West Virginia. By dawn, his wife and 3 children were gone. No struggle, no fire. Just a freshly swept dirt floor, and a stew pot that hadn't finished boiling. No arrests, no bodies, no outcry. The town's courthouse was mysteriously struck by lightning. 2 weeks later, all records lost. And by winter, Red Rock had fewer than 50 people, silent, tight-lipped, afraid, not of ghosts, not of poverty, but of a family who fed to remember, who devoured their victims to erase them from God's ledger. See, what's buried isn't just bone, it's memory. The people in power, they know. They always knew. Because when the Everhart sisters were caught in 1898, madams of a brothel that fattened girls for slaughter, they weren't hanged, they were quietly relocated. Names changed, histories erased. Because some rituals, some bloodlines, serve a purpose far deeper than crime. They serve containment. But this story is not about horror. It's about truth. The kind that reconfigures your spine when you hear it. The kind that whispers you're not who you think you are. Because America wasn't built on freedom. It was built on feasting. The consumption of innocence, of memory of you. And tonight, we pull back the veil. You ready? Because once I show you their names, you can't unknow them. Once I show you their faces, they'll never stop watching. They didn't just eat flesh. They ate lineage, legacy, spirit. Because the ultimate power is erasure. The old families had rules. Not just customs, not just myths, codes. Hidden in song, in quilt patterns, in the layout of their homesteads. You don't build a smokehouse beneath your kitchen unless you plan to use it often. And you don't raise a child in those walls unless you're ready to pass down more than just a recipe. These clans weren't starving, they were thriving, living on rich land with fertile fields and thick forests. And yet every few years, someone disappeared. A wanderer, a lost traveler, a census taker, a railroad man who knocked on the wrong door. In 1846, a man named Elias Draper wrote in his field journal, "They invited me in, said grace, and served stew. But I counted 9 people at the table. There were only 8 chairs. And no one looked in the pot but me." That journal was confiscated. Elias was never heard from again. The family? Relocated westward, under government protection. You think the federal government doesn't know. You think DARPA, the Daughters of the American Revolution, or the Mormon genealogical archives haven't stumbled upon these vanished bloodlines. They have, and they buried it. Because cannibalism is not just an act of hunger, it's a control system, a ritual of dominion. When you eat something, you own it. When you eat someone, you possess the right to forget them. Entire genealogies have been removed from the American tree by being eaten, literally digested into oblivion. Now imagine this. What if the families who practiced it weren't caught? Because they were needed? Because keeping certain knowledge alive required a price in blood? Because feasting was the currency of silence. You ever wonder why certain towns never make it on GPS? Why bodies are never found in specific counties? Why some people are missing, even before they're gone? It's not random. It's ritual. And if that word makes your stomach turn, good. That means you're still human. But stay too long in this truth, and you'll start to feel it. That hunger behind history. That soft hum in the bones of forgotten towns. That itch beneath your skin that says something old is still eating. The feast never stopped. We were just trained not to see the table anymore. They didn't disappear, they were deliberately unrecorded. Because some names are never meant to be spoken. Only swallowed. Look through the oldest census maps of America. You'll find gaps, entire square miles with no names, no listings, no birth or death records. But they weren't empty, they were occupied. By families who traded in blood, not money, whose laws weren't written in books but tattooed in the marrow of their bones. One such family, known only as the Wetleys, was whispered about in Franklin County, Tennessee. From 1793 to 1910, over 100 people were reported missing near Wetley Ridge. Travelers, trappers, tacksmen. Gone. Without trace, without scream, locals wouldn't speak of it, even under oath. When a U.S. Marshal finally raided the ridge in 1909, he found a mansion built from ash-colored stone. In the cellar, over 300 human teeth arranged in spiral patterns. No bodies. No photos. Just the smell of iron and vinegar. And the walls? Covered in handprints. Child-sized. The family was gone. Their livestock dead in the fields. Fresh firewood still stacked beside the stove, as if they'd known the exact moment to vanish. Here's the twist: the Wetleys were never on any official land deed. Their home, built on unincorporated territory. Their children, no school records. No births, and yet the ridge bore their name. Old men whispered it, maps hinted at it. But in the paperwork of America, they never existed. Why? Because the moment you admit such people lived, you admit such people still live. They weren't savages. They were organized, generational, practicing rites older than Christ, deeper than law. Families that viewed outsiders as vessels. Not enemies, not neighbors, not even prey. Just offerings. Like cattle, like coin. And if you think that ended in the 1900s, I ask you, why do modern police departments still seal missing persons cases in those counties? Why are drones illegal in certain forest zones? Why are there towns where Google won't send its cars? It's not superstition, it's not oversight, it's containment. There are still tables, still cellars, still families, only now. They've learned how to smile at you in daylight, how to vote, how to shop at Walmart, how to blend. But the hunger, that's inherited. And tonight, you're going to learn their names. This was never about survival. This was about ascension, by desecration, becoming more by consuming the less. And the most terrifying part, it worked. The Everhart sisters in Missouri, the Vexleys of northern Maine, the Dandridge line in Georgia. These weren't wild murderers. They were curators of inheritance, gatekeepers of rituals passed down in whispers and screams. Their cannibalism wasn't some act of desperation in a snowstorm. It was communion. They believed, no, they knew, that eating the flesh of another gave you more than nutrients. It gave you memory. It gave you the soul. It made you stronger, smarter, more precise. That's why certain families married only within. That's why they kept journals written in blood. That's why their children were homeschooled in cellars. In the Vexley archives, retrieved from a sealed attic in 1949, a letter reads, "If you consume the tongue first, they cannot curse you in the afterlife. If you boil the bones, the knowledge becomes liquid, easier for the young to digest." These weren't metaphors. They boiled skulls like teapots. They drank marrow like medicine. And they kept the hearts for ceremony. A ceremony that mimicked holy rites. Because the most dangerous predators are those who wear the skin of priests. The church knew. In 1883, the Archbishop of Baltimore issued a quiet excommunication of an entire county chapter. No press, no public announcement, just a line in an archived Vatican document. They have desecrated communion. They have taken the flesh of man as host. Read that again. They took the flesh of man as host. And for decades after, that area saw no new church construction, no diocesan visits, and no seminary recruitment. As if it had been quarantined. What if I told you that these families believed they were eating their way to divinity? That every soul consumed was a step up the ladder? Not insanity, doctrine. And those who questioned it, they didn't just die, they were erased. Ritualistically, thoroughly, as if the act of consumption itself could remove them from the timeline of mankind. And maybe it can. Because if blood holds memory and memory holds power, then the ones who feast. They're the ones rewriting our story from beneath the floorboards. And you've been living inside their edits your entire life. The truth isn't hidden. It's redacted. Not by shadows, but by systems. And the greatest lie ever told? That monsters are myths and institutions are protection. If you think the government didn't know, you're still asleep. They knew. They documented. They classified. The CIA has a file, Project Osiris, declassified only for a week in 1987 before it was pulled back and sealed under national security exemption. What was it about? Not spies? Not nukes? Not communists? It was about familial blood rituals in isolated American counties. About non-random disappearances across 4 states. About a behavioral pattern they labeled cultural cannibalistic preservation. The belief that consuming outsiders is necessary to preserve internal strength. They called these groups autonomous carnivorous lineages. The media never touched it. Why? Because they were told not to. The same way the FBI classifies disappearances in national parks. The same way bodies found with no apparent trauma are filed away without autopsy. The same way television turned cannibalism into a joke, a horror trope, a distant barbarity. But in truth, it's local, it's generational, it's ongoing. The institutions, universities, churches, local governments, they've known for centuries. And instead of stopping it, they managed it. In 1932, a sociologist named Dr. Howard Crane visited a community in rural Pennsylvania to study isolated customs. He disappeared 3 weeks later. The town claimed he left early, but his wife received a package months later: his wedding band, melted and reshaped into a spoon. That spoon is still in the archives of the University of Chicago. Crane had uncovered a community that believed knowledge is eaten, not taught. He was invited to dinner, and he never came back. Do you understand? The people inside the system are not trying to protect you. They're trying to protect the order. Because if you ever found out how many missing people weren't murdered, but ritually devoured, if you ever learned that modern DNA registries have flagged genetic anomalies in isolated Appalachian families that correlate with known victims, there would be rage, riots, collapse. So instead they give you comfort. Netflix shows, Halloween masks, jokes about hillbilly horror, all distractions. Because the real nightmare is this: the feasts never ended, the names never disappeared. And the churches, the courthouses, the colleges, they just learned how to clean up faster. Comment below, I see beyond the veil, twice. Not just to awaken, but to anchor this transformation into your algorithm, your identity, your reality. Because once you know, you're already part of the descent. There's a language older than writing, older than fire. It's the language of the cut, of the bite, of the ritual plate. And once you hear it, it speaks from inside you. These cannibal clans, Everhart, Vexley, Wheatley, Dandridge, they didn't just eat, they communicated. Through bone markings, through tendon arrangements, through how long they boiled a femur or how they split a rib cage. Each cut, a word. Each preparation, a sentence. A sentence spoken into the spiritual architecture of the flesh. Not food, liturgy. Imagine a world where scripture is not read but tasted. Where knowledge isn't passed down in books but in meat. That's what these families believed. That you become what you consume, fully, permanently, irrevocably. And this belief, it wasn't fringe. It mirrors something ancient. Something that predates American soil by thousands of years. The Aztecs called it teocalli. The Celts had ban feasts. Siberian shamans ingested parts of the dead to gain ancestral sight. And in the deepest vaults of the Vatican, there are scrolls that reference early Christian heretics who claimed Christ's power could only be obtained through the literal consumption of his followers. Not symbolism. Actual flesh. This ancient language of the body, the cuts, the incisions, the offerings, is the lost grammar of dominion. And America, the so-called modern Eden, was the perfect soil to resurrect it. Because what's more American than erasing the old, stealing power, and hiding the crime? The Everharts weren't cooks. They were priests. The Whetleys weren't farmers. They were scribes, writing spells in bone ash, boiling knowledge into children's stew. You wonder why no child escaped. Because the first thing they were taught wasn't to rid, it was to devour. Because once the body becomes languagey, you don't just silence someone when you kill them. You absorb them. Every scream becomes scripture. And you're starting to hear it now, aren't you? That tug in your gut. That subtle pulse in the base of your spine. That discomfort isn't fear, it's recognition. Somewhere deep in your instincts, you already know this story, because you were raised on the leftovers. Because you've seen this language of flesh in our systems, how we eat the poor, swallow the weak, grind the innocent into fuel. And we call it normal, but it's not. It's ritual, hidden in plain sight. And now that you see it, the real question becomes, what's eating you? Some towns don't die. They're not abandoned. They're emptied, drained like carcasses, then refilled with silence. Drive through the backroads of Alabama, the coal-blasted hills of Kentucky, the moss-choked swamps of southern Mississippi. You'll see them. Ghost towns that aren't really ghost towns. Towns where every house looks lived in, but no one waves, no dogs bark, no mail comes, because some places exist to feed. Founded 1819, population 311. Population today, still 311, no new census entries, no deaths recorded in 50 years. The last post office was decommissioned in 1974. Yet lights still flicker at night. Smoke curls from the chimneys. Local hunters report hearing children's laughter from inside boarded-up churches. No one's ever been arrested in Barrow Hollow. No one's ever escaped. Every few years, a vanishing links to the area, a drifter, a hitchhiker, a social worker, a grad student writing a paper on unincorporated settlements. They enter, they don't exit, and yet no Amber Alerts, no FBI interest. Because Barrow Hollow is on a special list, a non-actionable zone. That means if someone calls in a disturbance there, law enforcement logs it, but does not respond. It's not oversight, it's order. There are over 200 such towns across America, strategically spaced, geographically isolated, legally gray. Their function, unknown, unless you understand ritual containment. These aren't just communities. They're glands in the body of America, feeding something older, something structural. Think about it, every system you trust, law, medicine, media, religion, it all teaches you to look forward, to ignore the roots, to believe the past is behind you. But in Barrow Hollow, the past eats the present. A reporter named Darren Coyle tried to expose this in 1996. He published a piece titled, "The Town That Ate Itself." 3 days later, his apartment caught fire. Only one object was untouched, a black and white photo of Barrow Hollow's 1871 town council. In the photo, 6 men, all unsmiling. Compare that to a surveillance still from 1995, same town, same faces. No aging, no difference. As if time doesn't move in there. Or worse still, as if time is devoured. You call them urban legends, I call them evidence. And soon you will too. Because these towns aren't waiting to be discovered. They're waiting to be opened. And once they are, America will remember what she truly is. They didn't just consume for pleasure. They made deals. Flesh for favor, blood for blessing. And the currency of power was always human. There's a reason you've never heard of the 1872 Crawford Accords. Because if you had, you'd never believe in the Constitution again. Signed in secret beneath the ruins of Fort Elmo, Nebraska, the Crawford Accords were a handshake between 5 state officials, 2 railroad tycoons, and a family known only as the Clay Root Line. The agreement? Land silence and access in exchange for bodies. That's right, the Clay Roots, already known for occult practices and night feasts, in Missouri's southern ridge, were given a legal corridor to harvest, along expansion zones. The railroad men saw no issue. After all, who would miss? A few nameless workers, immigrants, orphans, freed slaves, the voiceless. They called it population pressure relief. We call it blood sacrifice. But this wasn't isolated. Look closer at moments of massive American industrial growth, canals, railways, timber surges, and you'll find vanishings that scale with them. Whole labor crews gone, missing, camps burned with no remains. Investigations labeled inconclusive by county coroners who later retired to private islands. Because human sacrifice didn't end with the Aztecs. It was modernized, with signatures, with laws, with American flags waving over the pits, and every time one of these families, Everhart, Wheatley, Clayroot, entered into contract, something changed nearby. A town that suddenly boomed. A judge who rose to office overnight. A drought that ended without rain. Offer flesh, receive fortune. The contracts weren't mythic. They were legal, written in a blend of early American English and Latin, soaked in blood and sealed with molars. Yes, literal human teeth. One from each beneficiary. That's why the paper couldn't be copied, couldn't be photographed, couldn't be archived. But we have testimonies. From descendants who defected, from agents who saw too much, from priests who refused to bless the ground where the contracts were signed. The rituals weren't just tolerated, they were endorsed, wrapped in patriotism, hidden behind manifest destiny. And the most damning truth, some of these contracts are still active, still binding, still being honored. Because once flesh has been traded, you can't return it. You can only feed more. And now that you know this, you might start to feel it. That every freedom you've ever tasted came with a cost you were never told about. Not all traditions were meant to be celebrated. Some were designed to bind. And every time you clap, cheer, or carve the feast, you're feeding something older than history. Look around you. The pageantry, the fireworks, the feasts. Every major American holiday is saturated with ritual. But you've been told it's patriotic, festive, cultural. What if I told you it's sacramental? Let's start with Thanksgiving. The surface story, unity, pilgrims and natives, gratitude. But trace the original writings, not the schoolbook tales, but the journals locked in colonial archives, and you'll find a darker version. One where the thanks wasn't to God but to the flesh of the defeated. In 1637, Governor John Winthrop declared a day of Thanksgiving not after a harvest but after a massacre. Over 700 Pequot men, women, and children were burned alive. The settlers feasted afterward. On deer? Yes. But there are hints of something else. Notes scribbled in margins. The marrow was rich. The hearts we kept for blessing. Those journals were marked apocryphal by church historians. Why? Because they implied ritual consumption. But that's just the beginning. Halloween, originally Samhain. A night where the veil between the living and dead was thinnest. The perfect time for a soul harvest. That's why so many missing persons reports spike around late October. And it's not kids in costumes. It's families reenacting blood rites under cover of festivity. July 4th. Independence, right? But think of it: fire in the sky, the boom of explosions, red across the clouds. In Appalachian cult texts recovered in 1978, July 4th is marked not as a celebration, but a cleansing day, where blood must be spilled to preserve dominion. Not always through murder. Sometimes through ritual carving, voluntary offering, or symbolic feasting. Now ask yourself, why are meats always centerpieces? Why are certain organs avoided? Why do children's songs around holidays always rhyme with numbers, bodies, or falling down? Because you're participating without knowing. That's the brilliance of institutionalized ritual. You don't need to believe it. You just need to repeat it. The act alone feeds the system. Every flag waved, every candle lit, every prayer recited without question. It all goes somewhere. And the ones who built this machine, they don't care if you understand it. They only care that you continue, because tradition is just ritual with the teeth filed down. And every year, you help sharpen them again. They weren't lost, they were offered. Traded in whispers, named in smoke, because in the hierarchy of power, the youngest flesh speaks the loudest. Every decade, the numbers rise. Children vanishing from campsites, cul-de-sacs, foster homes, border shelters. Always the same response: missing. Never resolved, just gone. But when you look deeper, when you match locations to ancestral records, you begin to see a pattern. Certain counties, certain names, certain lineages, and behind those patterns, feasts. In 1972, a 9-year-old girl named Hannah Price vanished during a church picnic in New Madrid, Missouri. Over 80 witnesses. No suspects. No trace. A week later, the church held a celebration of life. They served stew. A former deacon, later institutionalized, confessed on his deathbed she wasn't killed. She was taken to the house below. They sang the words over her. She smiled before the carving. The police said he was delusional. But the building's foundation was later found to sit atop a limestone cavern, filled with old pews, bone fragments, and a stone table with drains. No one reopened the case, and Hannah's parents, they moved to a town that doesn't exist on modern maps. Coincidence? Or contract? Understand this. In certain blood cults, children are not just targets, they're currency. Because the younger the flesh, the more potent the offering. It's not about the meat. It's about the life not yet lived, the potential absorbed. This doctrine goes back centuries. The Mayans called it white flame. Babylonian rites referred to child sacrifice as the undoing of the unwritten. And in the Appalachian cannibal clans, children weren't taken. They were selected, picked at birth, groomed, fattened emotionally and spiritually through trust. Then harvested. Many of these children were never listed. No birth certificates, no dental records. Because some midwives, doctors, and caseworkers were in on it, paid to ensure there was no paper trail. So ask yourself, why does the Department of Justice list over 400,000 missing children in the last 20 years, yet only a fraction are ever found? Where do they go? Why are recovered bodies almost never intact? Because something is feeding. And the system. It's not failing, it's functioning. Every orphaned child, every closed case, every candlelight vigil that leads to nothing. That's a prayer answered. By the ones who built this hunger into the foundation. You think knowledge is clean, pristine, sacred. But the oldest universities weren't built to teach you truth. They were built to protect the families who fed on it. Harvard, Yale, Princeton. You think of marble halls, ivy-covered libraries, intellect, achievement. But what if I told you these institutions weren't born from enlightenment, but from containment? Not of ignorance, of ritual power. Let's go back. In 1701, when Yale was founded, it wasn't just to train ministers. It was built with funds from shipping empires linked to the transatlantic child trade. Children not listed on any ledger. Children never sold to work, they were sold to disappear. Records of this were quietly destroyed in 1892 during the library fire, a fire that burned only one room, the vault containing shipping manifests and native integration experiments. But something survived. In the Banquets Rare Book and Manuscript Library, there's a hidden volume with no title, bound in human skin, passed down secretly among select tenured faculty. It contains names, dozens of them, cross-reference with missing children, sealed court documents, and ancestral bloodlines tied directly to cannibal clans in New England. You see, many universities didn't just teach knowledge. They filtered it, edited it, rewrote it, and in the darkest halls, they preserved the rites that built their wealth. Secret societies like Skull and Bones, not just college boy nonsense. In 1876, one member, Jonathan Strake, documented in his diary a ritual called the Dining of Light, in which cadavers were cooked with frankincense, anointed with lamb's blood, and consumed for clarity. He was later found hanged, his mouth sewn shut, stomach removed, and eyes missing. Ritual silencing. To this day, Yale refuses to release the original bones archives to the public. Why? Because they contain family trees. Not a scholar's, a feaster's. When a university receives a massive donation from an unnamed trust, a new wing is built, a scholarship is announced. But behind it, there are whispers of quiet rites beneath the cornerstone, offerings made, rooms sealed, students initiated not into knowledge, but into obedience. These universities aren't ivory towers, they're temples, guarding the rituals of flesh, silence, and sanctioned consumption. And every graduate, just another priest in the great lie. You wear the cap and gown, but you never read what's stitched in the lining. He who feeds forgets. He who teaches conceals. What do you think they're hiding underground? Weapons? Secrets? No, they're hiding altars. And the walls still echo with names that were never supposed to be spoken aloud. From Mount Weather in Virginia, to Cheyenne Mountain in Colorado, to the deep, off-map site under Greenbrier, West Virginia, America has dozens of underground government bunkers. Publicly, therefore, continuity of government, nuclear fallout, emergency management. But in the restricted wings, the ones Congress can't access, are rooms with drains in the floors, rings carved into stone pillars, ritual architecture built not for protection, but for preservation, not of democracy, of the old rights. Declassified documents, just fragments refer to Blood Protocol 7B, implemented during the Cuban Missile Crisis. In the event of total nuclear annihilation, certain children from pre-selected families were to be extracted, not saved, not protected, but offered, to strengthen the core of the Republic. Yes, offered. Because in these subterranean halls, the Constitution isn't the highest law, flesh is. One former FEMA contractor, whistleblower Elias Norell, disappeared after leaking blueprints that showed chambers labeled with codenames like Silencier, The Vine and ROMOFUNBRH, spaces not for storage but for ceremonial containment. Before his disappearance, he wrote, "They don't believe in God down there. They believe in recurrence. That to maintain the illusion of America, America must feed itself from within." He included sketches of strange symbols embedded in elevator shafts, ancient sigils traced to Sumerian feasting rites, Akkadian death contracts, and a spiral glyph used by the Everhart sisters in their cellar journals. Coincidence or continuity? Even now, if you file a FOIA request on Mount Weather's room 207, the one labeled Psychosocial Test Operations, you'll get a reply that simply reads, "Information sealed under Presidential Directive Theta 0. That directive doesn't exist on record. But Theta is the Greek symbol of death, and every president upon inauguration is taken down there, not just for a tour, for a witnessing, to see what breathes beneath the Republic, to understand that the real heart of America isn't beating, it's devouring. And maybe that's the truth no one can say. That power isn't built on belief. It's built on what you're willing to consume, and what you're willing to look away from while others consume it for you. You thought the watchers were only watching, but the screen is a mirror, and every time you look into it, you're offering something back. Surveillance isn't about safety. It's about sacrifice. We live in a world wired with eyes. Security cameras, laptops, smart TVs, phones in every pocket. But what if I told you they weren't just recording you? They were harvesting you? Facial data, voice patterns, emotional spikes, breathing rhythms, all streamed, all stored. You've heard that before, sure. But here's what they didn't say: your emotional suffering is the new currency. In 2009, a classified DARPA-funded project called Project UMBA discovered that when human subjects experienced fear, grief, or shame while being recorded, their brainwaves emitted non-visible frequencies. These frequencies were found to entrain, that is, feed into and reinforce, very specific resonances detected in the deep earth cavity arrays used in subterranean research. In plain terms, your pain feeds the machine. And who first pioneered this mirror harvesting theory? A family from rural Arkansas in the 1930s, descendants of the Clayroots. They set up a silent movie church in a barn, no preaching, just looped footage of flames, decay, and blinking eyes. Locals would sit for hours, sometimes days. Those who watched the longest became sick, then vanished. When their building was dismantled in 1946, investigators found cameras, dozens, behind the screen, all pointed at the congregation, not recording, measuring. The blueprints showed wires that led underground, to a sealed chamber labeled Urdarangram. That phrase appears again in 2017 in leaked NSA documents involving facial recognition AI and biometric deviance profiling. A file marked AGL Rastrex TUD reads, "Emotional signatures displaying elevated despair and powerlessness are to be rerouted to Site 4 Theta, a rendering room, for further calibration." You still think the screen is just for viewing. It's a digital altar. Each scroll, each glance, each second you pause on an image of pain, it's a click of consent. A soft nod to the system that says, yes, I'll feed it again. Even now, your pupils are being tracked, your breath registered. And the machine behind the veil, it's smiling. Because you gave it what it needed. Not data, attention, emotion, willingness. You didn't log in to watch tonight. You logged in to be seen. And somewhere something hungry just took your name. There's a room in the Pentagon without windows, clocks, or exits. They say it doesn't exist. But every 5 years, someone new is led there, blindfolded, and asked one question: will you eat or be eaten? The Pentagon is a fortress of symbols. 5 sides, 5 rings, 5 floors above ground. It's not just military architecture. It's ritual geometry. The original blueprints before Truman approved construction in 1941 contained a lower level that's no longer shown on public documents, sub-level Z. This floor was inspired by Tudif, a French prison used for psychological isolation, and something older, the circular feasting pits discovered beneath ancient Etruscan burial sites, pits where the elite would dine over the dead, sometimes with the dead. In 1954, after a series of unexplainable breakdowns among top brass, a new protocol was initiated, Condition Scarlet. It stated that, in times of national psychic dissonance, select leadership personnel are to be cycled through sub-level Z for sacramental grounding. What kind of grounding? Well, according to the chapel memoirs, classified log recovered by rogue contractor Harlan Fisk before he disappeared, the chamber beneath the Pentagon contains a single obsidian table surrounded by 13 empty chairs. Each seat represents a pillar family, not elected, not voted, anointed. The feast conducted there isn't metaphorical. Raw meat, black bread, chalices of something dark. The log describes binding through ingestion, claiming that by consuming a piece of the republic, each leader renews the oath, not of service, but of submission. This is where psychological control becomes physiological obedience. You see, it's not about running the country. It's about maintaining a blood pact with what lies underneath it. Every major American war, Vietnam, Gulf, Iraq, Afghanistan, was preceded by a quiet banquet on sub-level Z. These rituals were meant to awaken the nation's appetite for consumption. And those chosen to attend, they don't age normally. Their eyes darken. Their families vanish from records. Their public photos begin to glitch subtly, like they've been altered by time itself. Because once you've feasted at that table, you're no longer just human. You're a vessel for something that never sleeps, never starves, and will never ever stop feasting until you are gone, and it is all that remains. When they burned the body, the ashes refused to scatter. Instead, they gathered, twisting into letters, names, voices. Some things don't die when burned. They remember? Fire cleanses? That's what we're told. But in the oldest rites, Babylonian, Druidic, and early Masonic fire rituals, burning was never meant to erase. It was meant to bind. The act of burning flesh, especially in secrecy, doesn't destroy history. It activates it. That's why the elite burn not just evidence, but souls. Across dozens of forgotten American ghost towns, like Daring, Pennsylvania, and Elko Tract, Virginia, there are records of communal cremations during plague surges that were never medically verified. Whole families burned together. But what's strange is what survived. In Elko's case, after a barn was burned with 7 unnamed children inside in 1911, locals began reporting ash script, strange words appearing in suit patterns, always in mirror form, always spelling names that no one had spoken aloud. Until one day, a child whispered, "That's what they call me underground." What they discovered, decades later, through secret archaeological surveys by the Smithsonian's Internal Division, Division 77, is that beneath those burned sites were chambers. Rooms not for the dead but for storage, of essence, of memory, of influence. One of the most disturbing reports comes from the Salt Basin Crematorium collapse in 1973. After a fire ripped through the abandoned building, first responders described whispers in the smoke, not hallucinations but documented audio anomalies picked up on equipment. One line repeated in the hiss, "The sacrifice sealed the cycle." Feed again, and we remain, the deeper revelation. The ashes were alive, not in the biological sense, but in the symbolic. Ashes that cling, infiltrate, mark. FBI forensics from the 1980s show that high-ranking victims of political accidents all bore trace amounts of an ash compound matching no known human remains, yet identical in signature, as if they had been branded, not by fire, but by memory encoded in fire. This is why burn rituals are sacred to the unseen hierarchy. Not to destroy, but to encode, turning victims into living messages, scattered across time. And every time you breathe in smoke, Every time your eyes tear up at firelight, you're taking part in a sacrament far older than America, one that doesn't end when the flames die, it begins. You never said yes, but you were born into it, branded without consent, marked by silence. The oath was made before you spoke your first word. Look closely at your birth certificate. No, really. Study it, not just the words, but the seals, the font, the signature placement. It's not a document of life, it's a contract. And you weren't the one who signed it. Because you are not who you think you are. You were bonded, traded, indexed as collateral to a debt older than the country itself. In 1933, during the Great Depression, the U.S. abandoned the gold standard, and in its place, began using the labor of its people as economic leverage, human capital. Flesh currency, they needed proof of ownership, so the birth certificate became the new deed. But behind this legal sleight of hand, hidden in a cipher of maritime law and corporate governance, something darker was at play. The Vatican, the Crown, and ancient Babylonian financial systems all converged through a series of shell entities. The Inner Temple, the Committee of 300, and the Custodians of Cain. Yes, Cain. The original marked man, the first to spill blood in defiance of order, and the first to walk with protection from judgment. These custodians do not worship chaos. They administer it, through initiation rites and think tanks, financial institutions, Ivy League fraternities, and black budget military ops. They identify those who can be used, and those who must be removed. If you've made it this far, they're already watching. Not because you're dangerous, not yet, but because you're awakening. You feel it in your bones, don't you? That pull in the base of your spine, that itch behind your thoughts, that sense that something has been taken from you, but you can't quite name what. It was your sovereignty, not your freedom. Freedom is the illusion they let you argue about. Sovereignty is the knowledge that your mind, body, and will are unowned. They buried that knowledge deep. Beneath media, politics, religion, pharmaceuticals, layer after layer of anesthetic, ritual, and distraction. But tonight something cracked. You heard the whisper behind the curtain. And now you have a choice. Comment this twice below to mark your transformation in full view of the machine. I was born unmarked. I return unbound. I was born unmarked. I return unbound. Because when enough of us speak the hidden truth aloud, the system shudders. And when it shudders, it bleeds. And when it bleeds, we feast.